Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Envision IT webinar on upgrading to SharePoint 2016 and SharePoint Online. My name is Peter Carson. I'm the president of Envision IT. I'm going to be leading the session for us today. I'm also a SharePoint MVP and a virtual technical specialist with Microsoft Canada. All my contact information is up on the slide here, and we are going to be posting the slide deck after the session. So you can pull that down from our envisionit.com site, as well as the recording from the session. So if you have colleagues that didn't get a chance to join today, you think it'd be useful for them to have a look through the content, by all means encourage them to either pull down the deck or look at the on-demand recording of the session. Also on the call with me today, I have Amanda DaCosta. She's in charge of our sales at Envision IT. So if you've seen something interesting, you'd like some help in terms of doing an upgrade either to SharePoint 2016 or to Office 365, please reach out to Amanda. We'd love to talk to you about that. All right, so just to jump into our agenda for today's session, we're going to start with some, well, we've already done the introduction, so a quick overview of Envision IT and who we are. We're not going to spend too long on that. We're going to dive right into upgrade overview. So that's really looking at SharePoint upgrades holistically, not specific to SharePoint 2016 or 365, more just what do you need to think about as you're going through an upgrade. And then we're going to take two different paths from there. We're going to dive deep down into what does an upgrade to SharePoint 2016 look like, and then we'll finish up by looking at the same sort of path through Office 365. So from a quick overview of an Envision IT point of view, we are Office 365 productivity consultants. We've been working with SharePoint since 2001, and we're multiple gold partner and award winners. We focus mainly on three workloads within SharePoint, that being public-facing websites, intranets or staff portals, and extranets or member portals. And all of those could be on-premises SharePoint, could be in Office 365, or could even be hosted in Azure. We're going to talk about all those different scenarios. As well as delivering those solutions, we also provide training to our clients, primarily around end user from a collaboration and web content management point of view. And then we also have a product, the Extranet User Manager, which is an add-on, not specifically for SharePoint anymore, that was its roots, but it's really more a broad, how do you bring external users, clients, partners, etc., into your portals. How do you delegate the management of those users, provide self-registration, forgotten password, a simplified login, that sort of thing. So we've got a number of webinars up on our site from that topic. We also have an upcoming webinar later in April on that topic too. What I want to do though, before we get too deep into the actual upgrade talk, is just to get a sense from the audience of what are people's background and what versions of SharePoint do they currently use. So I'm just going to open up the poll here and give you a minute or so to respond back from that. You can respond to more than one if you're using multiple environments. Are you in Office 365 already? Are you working with SharePoint Server 2013, 2010, one of the older versions, Foundations, etc. from there. So I'll give you a second to respond to that. Okay, we've got pretty much everybody in there. So let me close that poll out. Let's just share that back out with everybody to get a sense. So there are a few in Office 365. It's still the minority. Most of the people either on SharePoint Server 2013 or 2010. A few running on Foundations and a few still on MOS 2007. And we will talk about, coming from an older version like 2010 or 2007, what does that upgrade path look like? And then the next poll that I want to bring up, I'm only going to do two of these, is really how do you use SharePoint today? So ignoring the version of SharePoint that you're running, are you using it from an internal collaboration point of view, from a web publishing intranet perspective? Do you have an extranet running on SharePoint? Or are you actually running your public-facing website on SharePoint? So again, I'll give everybody a minute there just to respond. I've got almost everybody there. We'll give it a few more seconds. Perfect. So let me just do the same thing here. I'll close that poll out, share that back out. So everybody's using it from an internal collaboration point of view. That's not surprising. That's really where SharePoint usually gets its first foot into an organization. Intranet's at 88%. That's actually consistent with the Microsoft stats that I've seen. Upwards of 90+% of organizations, even globally, are using SharePoint as their intranet. So it's very popular from a platform point of view. About half of you using it from an extranet's point of view. Not surprising given our client base and who we market this out to. Extranet is a big part of our side. And then also public-facing websites, about half of the folks running their public site on SharePoint as well. And we're going to talk specifically, and I have an example or a number of examples around the upgrade of a public-facing website. All right, let me just hide that. And we'll come back to our deck here. So let's talk from a general perspective around upgrading. You want to start just from a goals point of view. Why would you want to do an upgrade? What's driving that? I mean, often there's a platform upgrade incentive, end of life from Microsoft, and the IT department's doing a technology refresh or renewal project. So there may be a platform upgrade that's driving it from that point of view. But at the same time, there can be other goals from a business point of view. You're looking to rebrand. Maybe SharePoint's grown organically over a number of years, and it may not be the best organizational structure in there. How can we bring in a new information architecture? Depending on what versions you're coming from and going to, what are the new capabilities that are there in SharePoint? You want to leverage those and take advantage of those. And then is it time to bring in some governance, some legal, some compliance initiatives really driven from the business point of view? So how do we align the IT goals from a platform and technology refresh perspective with the business goals of how it's actually being used within the organization? Some of the challenges and considerations to think about. First off, should we upgrade? Looking at both from IT and from a business perspective, is there a good business case there for that? And then next, though, can we upgrade? Is there stoppers there? Is there things that we've done in our current SharePoint environment that preclude us from doing an upgrade? Maybe we're using some third-party tools that aren't supported in the latest version. Maybe we've got full trust solutions and we want to go to the cloud, but those don't work there. So what are the barriers to that upgrade, and how do we work around that? How should we actually perform that upgrade? So we'll talk about different techniques for going through the upgrade itself. And ultimately, if you're going to justify this to the business, what's the ROI around that? What sort of return on investment are we going to see from doing the upgrade? Or alternatively, what's the opportunity cost to us if we don't do anything? What's the risk to the organization on being on older versions, of not having the latest collaboration tools available to us, both from a productivity point of view and from a potential work stoppage or interruption as we get onto older versions there. So all things to think about as you're looking at the upgrade process. So there's a number of different strategies that we can take for upgrading. So if we think back to the stats that we saw in terms of which versions of SharePoint are people currently using. And yes, half of the people are on 2013, but 3/4 are actually still running on 2010 as well. And there's some folks back on MOS 2007 and Foundations. So we've got a lot of different versions that we're coming from. Are we going to upgrade to the next version, which is kind of the Microsoft path? If you're running on 2007, then you upgrade to 2010, then 2013, and now 2016. Or is it time to leapfrog that? We're still back on MOS 2007. There's no sense in us upgrading to 2010. That's now, it was developed 8-9 years ago. It was released 6 years ago. It's already getting out of date from that point of view. So how do we jump ahead? Should we jump to 2013? Or are we comfortable jumping right to the latest release version at 2016? Or is it time to think about the cloud? Maybe we're tired of running all the SharePoint servers and managing that infrastructure and thinking about disaster recovery and backup and high availability and all those sorts of things. Why don't we let Microsoft worry about that and just move that into Office 365? So we'll talk about that as well. So let's take the first scenario where we're just upgrading to the next version. So this is really the method that Microsoft supports out of the box. There's a number of ways of doing that. Database attach being the common one that we're going to be talking about. So I mean, there's things to think about as you're looking at that. What sort of storage requirements not only do you have to migrate what you currently have, but from a future growth point of view, how do we accommodate for that growth? What sort of customizations do we have? Do we have all those bits? Maybe there's missing files and such they don't have through there. Supportability limits in terms of size of content databases and things like that. orphan sites, what's the state and health of our current farm? Is it not patched? Is there changes to the platform that we need to think about? Search went through some fundamental changes between 2010 and 2013. So did web publishing. So how do we either take advantage of that or mitigate that change? Is there changes to authentication? MOS 2007 authentication was very different than claims-based that was introduced in 2010 and become prevalent in 2013 and 2016. So again, all things to think about as we're going to the next version. Or if we want to leapfrog to the latest version, I mean, if we're already running on 2013, that's certainly the next version scenario there. But if I'm back on 2010 or 2007, I have a choice. I can use third-party tools, or I can actually do multiple upgrades. You can build an interim farm to say, well, we're going to upgrade from 2007 to 2010 to 2013, and then take us into 2016. That's a lot of steps to go through. You might want to think about using a third-party tool for that. But if you're going, say, just from 2010 to 2016, it may not be a bad idea to say, well, we're just going to create a temporary 2013 farm, do the content database attached, do the visual upgrades, go through that process from there. Same sort of things to think about from a warnings and what to look out for, etc. through there. And then lastly, moving to the cloud. I mentioned high availability, disaster recovery. Those are things that, clients either don't think about but should, or they do think about, and they have to invest a lot of money in providing that kind of environment. Also just patching, we often see SharePoint farms that just haven't had a lot of love. They haven't been updated since the original release. There's been lots of service packs and cumulative updates that have come out from Microsoft, and those just aren't there. And when that gets far enough out of date, people get worried that, okay, well, it's still running and we haven't touched it in 3 years. We don't really want to touch it because we're worried that we're going to break it. And that's not really a good place to be in. So Microsoft takes all that off your plate. They're responsible for patching and maintaining current software. They do the high availability, the disaster recovery. I mean, there's still some things you want to think about. Backup solutions. Although Microsoft takes care of the backup, there are advantages to also doing your own backup, and there are third-party tools around that as well. Certainly, we need third-party tools to do the migration itself, and we'll talk about some of our favorites from that point of view. Okay, so let's look at broader business considerations as we're looking at the organizational aspects of doing an upgrade. Our environment and our skills, thinking about, well, who owns that environment? And that may sound like an odd question if you're a smaller organization, but you're a big one. Maybe you're the Canadian branch and the US IT department runs your SharePoint farm for you. And you want to do an upgrade, but you're beholden to them. What's that looking like? Are you looking to break that dependency? Maybe going to the cloud and managing your own Office 365 that way. So really understanding who's got the keys to the environment, both the current source environment and the target environment that you're looking to go to. And then what's your skill set within your organization? Do you have the ops team to run that SharePoint farm? Is there customizations that you've done? Is there a development team that understands those and is going to be able to upgrade those as required to support the newer platform? And then what's your support organization looking like? From a help desk point of view, from a training perspective, from a change management and communications point of view, these are all key factors to think about as you're looking at an upgrade. So customizations are a big thing to watch out for from an upgrade point of view. Was there a third-party implementer involved, or were they third-party add-ins, external add-ins that you've put into SharePoint, and what's the impact on that? If we look at our own product, Extranet User Manager, when we first brought it out, we were supporting SharePoint 2010 and then 2013. The product installed right into SharePoint itself. It became a membership provider to do forms-based authentication login right as part of SharePoint. That was a barrier to upgrade because it was very integrated into SharePoint as part of that. Our newer versions that we've been releasing over the last year and a half or so are much more decoupled from that point of view. So they act as an identity provider external to SharePoint, and the dependencies are much smaller there. We're not actually installing any bits into SharePoint. That makes the upgrade much easier. Same is true for custom developed code. I mean, we are a SharePoint development shop, and in the past we used to build all full trust solutions, which meant our code ran on the SharePoint farm. You need to get those solutions, put them on the new farm. If you were thinking about Office 365, that just didn't work because you can't run your code on the Microsoft farm. They don't allow that for obvious reasons. So how are those solutions built? Over the last 2 years or so, as we've been targeting Office 365 more and more, even our on-premises projects, we build those with methods that really leverage client-side code and standard interfaces and things like that, where we're not running code on the SharePoint farm itself. Again, that helps from an upgrade point of view. I'm actually going to be giving a talk again later in April on app alternatives and some of our methods for building those sorts of customizations. So if you're curious more about that, check out our upcoming events from that point of view. But this is really something that you need to look deep and hard at to understand how have we customized our current SharePoint and what impact is that going to have from an upgrade point of view. And then there's the project management side of it. Depending on the size of your organization, these upgrade projects can be quite extensive. I mean, we've done upgrades that took 1 month, 2 months for a smaller organization. We've done big organizations where it's 9, 12 months to go through that entire process, just because there's so many different departments involved in that. The change management, the QA, the actual change to the structure of the site is not a simple task. There's a lot involved in doing that. So you really need to understand, do we have the project management skills to run that within the organization, or do we need an external service provider to help us through that journey and through that process? But key though, within the organization, do we have an executive sponsor that's behind this? Do we have the backing of internal IT? Are the business units engaged? They're going to have to be very involved from a user acceptance testing, maybe from a change management and re-architecture point of view. It's key that we have the level of support that we need from that point of view. And then coming back to the business case, ultimately, what are we trying to deliver here? What's our timeline and schedule? Is this part of a bigger project? Are we looking at maybe implementing Exchange Online or Skype for Business as part of Office 365? How do those projects fit in with the SharePoint project? Is there a sequence that we want to do those in? What does that look like? Is there external drivers, deadlines that we're looking to achieve? Maybe we have some contracts, some hardware, some outsourcing arrangements that we want to be aware of, that we're not paying penalties by going over on those, that we want to retire them appropriately from that point of view. And I mentioned complementary technologies, primarily being Exchange and Skype for Business. Which versions of those are currently in place? How do those integrate with our plans with SharePoint Online or SharePoint 2016? The Office suite on the desktop, the operating systems on the desktops, supported browsers, all things that we need to think about. Certainly as we go to the newer versions of SharePoint, things like SharePoint 2013 and 2016 are much, much better from a browser support point of view, even from a mobile point of view. So things to think about there. So risk management is going to be a key part of the upgrade project. We're doing a significant change to the organization. How do we mitigate the risk involved in that? And that's both technical and organizational risks. I mean, we can use tools. I'll talk about one we use called SPDocKit that we use to basically inventory and catalog the actual farm infrastructure itself. So the size, the number of servers, farm solutions, all those sorts of things. We want to make sure that we properly catalog that and understand what the impact of the upgrade is on all of those. Is there things like content databases that have been growing and growing, and maybe they're multi-terabytes now, which are outside the supported size. So those are going to be a challenge from a timing to upgrade point of view, but also they're not necessarily supported from Microsoft in that state. Do we need to reorganize from an information architecture, split things into different site collections? As an upgrade is happening is probably the best time to do that kind of thing. And then organizationally, what's our approach? What sort of interdependencies, capabilities do we have within the organization? Is there, unrealistic budgets, timelines that are being put there? Do we not have the skill sets to do this? These are all things to think about as you're doing risk mitigation. So primary migration gotchas to think about, we've cataloged our farm, we've looked at what we've got in place there, we've met with the business, understand how they're using it. These are some of the things to watch out for. Do you have third-party web parts in there? Do those vendors support the new version that you're going to? Or do you have internally developed, custom developed web parts? Again, what's going to be the support and upgrade path from that point of view? There may be nothing involved. I mean, we've got full trust solutions that we built for SharePoint 2010 that we used as is for 2013, and we're actually using one of those now on 2016 as well. So not to say that you have to do changes for that, but you have to be aware that you may, and you have to investigate what the impact of that is. customizations, particularly if you're coming from 2010 or earlier. The master page design fundamentally changed in 2013. Yes, you can run in what's called compatibility mode, where you haven't done a visual upgrade, and your 2013 site kind of appears like 2010, so that can mitigate that. But if you want to go to 2016, you actually have to do that visual upgrade. So you have to think about the master page design, the solutions, the features, the binaries that you've got in there. Is there manual web config entries that you've put in on the servers? You need to understand what are all those, and let's make sure that we capture those, document them, and apply them appropriately in the new farm. Is there event handlers or timer jobs that you've got running doing special things? Is there a change to authentication, going from classic in 2007 or even in 2010 to claims as we move forward from 2010, 2013, 2016? Search is a big thing. It changed fundamentally also in 2013. So how do we accommodate for that? And workflows is often a big gotcha, particularly if you've got in-flight workflows. So you've got things that have been started but not finished. How is the upgrade going to manage that? Do we have tools that support that? As you get into the third-party tools, they're much better from that point of view of taking that workflow history with you and transferring those workflows that are in progress. Or maybe it's better to say to the business, look, these workflows, you either need to finish them before we do the upgrade, or you have to restart them after the upgrade. So there's different approaches you can take to managing and mitigating those. So we really need to list all those customizations, understand the source for them. Do we need updated or upgraded ones for there? And don't assume that all your SharePoint servers are the same. There may be web config entries that weren't properly done on all the servers, or binaries that are put on some but not all. So make sure you properly inventory all of your SharePoint servers as part of your review process through there. Now we can actually do this for you. A bit of a sales pitch here, apologize. But if you're interested, we have a pre-upgrade assessment. Basically what we'll do is we'll inventory your content. So we have some custom PowerShells that we've written that will actually go through your entire web application or through your farm and give us a report back of all the documents, all the different files that are in the content database from there. So that's very useful from understanding both how long is this upgrade going to take based on the size of the content that we're going to be moving, and is there an opportunity here to maybe trim stuff off. Maybe there's some stuff that should just be archived, it shouldn't go to the new farm, maybe it needs to be reorganized. Those decisions need to be made as part of the planning for the upgrade. I mentioned SPDocKit. There's a link here to it. This is a third-party tool. It's a great tool for documenting your farm, not just from an upgrade point of view, but any point in time to understand what do we have in place in our farm. It generates a very detailed report around there, and it'll list out all the solutions, all the customizations that you've done as part of that as well. And then we'll work with you to understand, what makes the most sense for you, going to SharePoint 2016 or Office 365. So at the end of that assessment, you'll get a report with the inventory that we talked about, and I'll show you an example of that, a detailed report of the farm configuration and an approach and estimated cost for actually doing the upgrade. It's not inexpensive. It's a one-day engagement. $1,480 is the price for that, and the details are up on our site there. So I'll leave the sales pitch now. We'll come back to actually going through the upgrade process from a SharePoint 2016 point of view. So let's get a little history first on SharePoint 2016. What does that look like? So we first saw public bits come out in August 2015. I'd heard some early news. I mean, I'm part of the Microsoft MVP community, so they do provide some NDA news to us, but August 2015 was when we could actually publicly talk about SharePoint 2016. There was a second code drop in November, and then there was a release candidate that came out in January. Then about 2 weeks ago, we saw the release to manufacturing. Now, they don't actually manufacture physical CDs or DVDs anymore. Software distribution is electronic now, but they still call it release to manufacturing. And what that means is basically, the release candidate is, this is what we think we're going to release, but we're still doing testing. The release to manufacturing says, we're done, and this is what's going to come out the door. It's not generally available for sale just yet, but these are the bits that are going to be sold when it gets publicly released. So you could actually install the RTM version today. It is available publicly and run that in your environment. You may not want to do that from a production point of view just yet. It is still in that testing phase, but there's not going to be further bits from that. Any fixes that come out now will be part of the cumulative update process that applies to all SharePoint versions. And then May 4th is when we're expecting the public release. There's a big event planned, online event, where they're going to be taking the wraps off all the details and such around that. I mean, a lot of that is out already, but that's sort of the big push. So that's when we expect the general availability on it as well. And I'll put a link in the deck as well to the site for that public release there. So that's kind of the history of the release for SharePoint 2016. If we flip gears and think about, well, what went into the actual product itself. I'm not going to go into feature set in this session. I did a session a couple ago that talked about new features in SharePoint 2016, and I'm curious to see what else comes out on May 4th. But really, the key driver for SharePoint 2016 was to say, okay, well, if we look at the history of SharePoint from 2001, 3, 7, 10, 13, the 13 build was what Microsoft used for SharePoint Online. So they took the last on-premise version, which was 2013, and they started creating SharePoint Online. Now, to run SharePoint at the massive scale that they do in Office 365, they had to do a lot of engineering work around that. And really what we're seeing in SharePoint 2016 is taking a lot of that engineering knowledge from a high availability, fault tolerance, patchability, zero downtime point of view, and bringing that back into the on-premises version. So whereas in the past, the online version was derived from the on-premises, now that's flipped the other way, and the on-premise is now derived from the cloud. It's all part of the cloud-first strategy that Microsoft has. There's new feature sets that come in from there as well, but there's not going to be one-for-one parity between features in online versus on-premise. The cycle online is much faster. Releases come out all the time, almost on a weekly basis sometime, as new features and changes are coming out online. We're not going to see that same cadence from an on-premise point of view. Okay, so what do I need to actually run SharePoint 2016? It's actually very similar to 2013. I mean, for a 3-server farm, thinking about a web front end, an app server, and a SQL server, those SharePoint servers are 4-core servers, 12 to 16 gig RAM. You can still build a single server farm where you put SQL, app server, web front end, everything onto one box. And the demo farm that I'm going to be using for the demo towards the end of this session is actually built that way, but it's not recommended from a production point of view. From an OS perspective, Windows Server 2012 R2 or 2016 Technical Preview 2, so they are supporting the newer version of Windows Server as it comes out, and SQL Server 2014 SP1 from a SQL point of view. So that's both the hardware and the software requirements for that. That's the baseline though. I mean, you really need to think about capacity planning as you're looking at your upgrade. And this is not specific to doing a SharePoint upgrade. These are general concepts to think about for any IT solution to understand capacity management. What are your performance and capacity targets for your environment? What's that architecture look like? What's the hardware that we need to support the number of users and features that we're going to have in there? But then let's test and validate that. You can use best practices to estimate how many servers do we need, how big are the content database is going to be, not just today, but going into the future. But you need to actually validate that. And then you need to monitor from an ongoing point of view. So capacity management is not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing thing. So you do your model design, pilot, and deploy. Let's say you've deployed your SharePoint 2016 on-premise environment now. Don't forget about it for the next 3 years and just leave it alone. You need to continue to monitor and maintain that. You may need to do additional modeling and design and piloting and deploying as that grows within your organization. You may have workloads or feature sets that weren't there when you first upgraded that you're adding to that that need additional capacity. Maybe the adoption has grown significantly beyond what your expectations were and you need more database room and storage and such from that point of view. So all things to think about from a capacity point of view. Then you also need to think about where you're going to host this. Do you have an on-premise data center that you're going to put it into, or is there a third-party hosting center that you keep your data center in that you're going to put this up in? Or maybe you're tired of data centers and you just want to go to Office 365 and let Microsoft take care of that. Now, we had quite a few folks that were using SharePoint from a public website point of view. Office 365 isn't an option for that. There was a minimal public website option in there. They deprecated that and removed it going on, I think, a year or two now. So that's not really an option there. But if you do want to be in the cloud, Windows Azure is an option there as well. So I actually have a blog post I put up last year talking about a public website architecture in Azure, and it's got pricing calculators and such that help you map out what that would look like and different availability options I haven't updated the pricing since then. Azure pricing is fairly fluid, so I would recommend you confirm your pricing to determine exactly what that looks like. But even if you're not using that from a public website point of view, it's still a good guide to use if I was going to put my staff portal, my intranet into Azure, what would that look like? Then we want to think about our migration approaches. How are we actually going to do this upgrade? In the past, in 2007, there was an option to do an in-place upgrade. I think it still existed in 2010, but it definitely disappeared by 2013, and it's no longer there in 2016 either as well. So you can't take your existing 2013 farm, stick the ISO file for SharePoint 2016 in there, and just upgrade it in place. You actually need to build a new farm. And that's a good thing from our point of view. I mean, the farms often need some care and feeding and some TLC from what we've seen, and this is a good opportunity to kind of wipe the slate clean and start fresh there. So you build a new 2016 farm, and then you do what's called a database attach upgrade. So basically you back up your databases from your existing farm, and you restore them and attach them to the new SharePoint 2016 farm, and away it goes from there. If you're coming from 2013, you've done the visual upgrade, really there's not a whole lot else involved in that. Yes, you need to make sure all your customizations and solutions are there in 2016, otherwise it's a fairly straightforward process. That process is not supported though for Office 365. You can't back up your on-premise content database, give it to Microsoft and say, put that up in Office 365 for me, please. You either need to do that manually or you have to use a third-party tool. And our strong recommendation is to use a third-party tool to do that. It's a good opportunity to reorganize as well. You can use those tools for on-premise migrations as well. They're a great way if you do need to do a lot of reorganizing and restructuring of your content. Using those tools are the best way to do that. But let's go a little deeper into the database attach upgrade and what that process looks like. So as I attach that database to the 2016 farm, it's going to do a schema update because the content database is a little bit different in 2016 than 2013. And that's a single monolithic operation at the database level. So you may have everything in one site collection and one content database. That means you do that once and your whole site is upgraded. If you're a larger organization, you've done a good job of splitting your sites into different site collections with different content databases. There may be quite a number of databases involved in doing that upgrade. And certainly as you get into larger upgrades, this can all be PowerShell scripted and SQL scripted because you want to do this in a repeatable kind of way. You're going to rinse and repeat quite a few times and test this. So you want to make sure that when it comes to be the weekend when you're going to do the actual upgrade, you're not doing that manually. You've got it all scripted and ready to go and test it. Now, I mentioned before, 2013, you could upgrade a 2010 content database to and keep it running in compatibility mode. You do have to complete that visual upgrade, which means you need the new branding and such in place in 2013 before you attach that to 2016. 2016 doesn't support that 2010 compatibility mode. So let's walk through what that process looks like. We're going to do some documentation, understand what our source environment looks like, and make sure that it's fully functional. You don't want to take a broken environment and upgrade it and try and figure out why it's still broken. Best to get things in a good state at the source before you start the upgrade. As I mentioned before, you're going to do a trial upgrade. You're probably going to do multiple trial upgrades. This is something you're going to repeat quite a few times through there. You find issues, you fix them, you do another trial upgrade. Once you've done it clean from a development point of view, you've done your initial QA on it, you need to get your users involved and do user acceptance testing as part of that as well. So that can be a fairly long, involved process going through all those upgrades. You need to plan for capacity, make sure that you got backups in place, so you've got a rollback plan if anything goes wrong, that you're optimized before upgrade. I mean, you're going to stress that source system as you're extracting stuff out from there. Let's make sure that it's up to that task and it can support that. Communications plan, I can't stress enough how important this is. You're going to be doing a big change that's going to affect everybody likely in your organization. Make sure they understand what this means, that we're doing testing, that we're going to involve you in that testing. When everybody signs off and we've had our go, no-go decision and we're ready to go, the communication plan is already out there. People understand what those dates are. And that say Friday at 5 p.m., we're going to set our original databases to read-only, which means nobody can do any more changes to the source system because we're starting the upgrade. And basically everybody has to wait until we're done before we do new work in there. So don't be doing any changes to your farm while you're going through that upgrade process. Do your upgrade. There's an upgrade status page. There's logs in the C program files. Make sure you review all those. You should have been reviewing those as you were doing your testing as well. do a review of the upgraded sites, bring your end users in, make sure they do user acceptance testing of the real live migration before you say, yeah, we're green light, we're good to go. Communicate out to everybody, okay, we've done the second go, no go, or go on the new system. This is where you start going now. It may be the same URL, it may be a different URL that they're going to. And then make sure that you've got training plans in place before and after the upgrade that they understand. If there's a new, they've moved from 2010 or 2007, suddenly we've got a 2013 experience in there. It looks very different. Make sure that people understand how to use that and be effective within the environment. So that's sort of running you through that process. The process is much the same if you're using a third-party tool, the exception that you're not attaching the databases, you're using the tools to do that, but you want to do all the same steps that we just went through from there. Our two favorites are the Metalogics and the ShareGate tools. They both have their advantages, disadvantages. I mean, ShareGate is strongly intended as an end-user tool, so it's something that the end users can be involved in the upgrade themselves. Excuse me. Metalogics has a little richer tool sets for managing that centrally, for building batches and repeatable processes around that. They're both good tools. They have different pricing models. Have a look at what makes sense for you. There's other tools as well, like AvePoint is a common one. We just don't have direct experience with it ourselves. Some other tools, the SP Docket I've already mentioned. Auto SP Install is another great tool. It's a very, very popular complex download for building your farm out. And Brian, although he's now a Microsoft employee, he's still doing this in his spare time to maintain this, and he's already released SharePoint 2016 support as part of that. So I'd strongly encourage you to use that to build out your new farm. So let's take you through some sample scenarios that we're actually in process of working on. So two sites that we've got going, one for the municipality of Chatham-Kent, the other for the College of Early Childhood Educators. So Chatham-Kent is actually going from 2007 to 2013. College of Early Childhood Educators from 2010 to 2013. 2016 is still new. It just hit RTM 2 weeks ago, so we weren't really ready to go 2016 with them. The nice thing, though, is once we're done these upgrades to 2013, if they decided that they want to go to 2016, that's actually a pretty simple upgrade because most of the changes happen between the 2010 and 2013 version from a web publishing point of view. So obviously 2013 has a new branding style to it. We've got master page designs that we've created in general that we use across all of our projects, and then we're customizing those for these clients. So they have a full bootstrap responsive design. That means that as you look at the sites on a mobile device or a tablet versus a desktop, it morphs and changes and adapts to the size of the device that you're on. I mean, this is a key feature that everybody expects on a site today, but there's a lot of sites out there that are not mobile optimized from that point of view. It's a lot easier to do that with the 2013 branding style, so that's one of the big drivers for both of these projects, actually. The other thing is to collapse the deep site structure. Not so much on our childhood educator, it's a simpler site. Chatham-Kent, though, had, I think, upwards of several hundred different subsites, partly organized so that they have different departments, content authors, we've got security around that, and we're still keeping that structure, but partly just to get the breadcrumb structure underneath the site. You had to do that with subsites in the past with 2007 or even in 2010. In 2013, though, Microsoft brought out the term store managed navigation that lets us do SEO-friendly URLs, and it also lets us collapse that site structure. So it results in a much simpler site for the content authors, still provides that nice experience from an end user point of view. In fact, a better experience because we've got those SEO-friendly URLs in there. So let's have a look at those sites quickly. We don't have the 2013 versions to show you, but you can go to those URLs just to get a sense of what the source sites look like. So if we go to the Chatham-Kent one, this is the 2007 site, very involved site, providing a lot of services to the citizens of the municipality of Chatham-Kent. And there's a fair bit of effort involved in reorganizing the content around here. What we've done is we've actually developed a process where we can take the existing site structure, build out in Excel, map out what we want the new structure to be, and actually automate a lot of that reorganization of the site. So rather than using a third-party tool and manually moving the sites around, where we still need to fix up a lot of links, build the term store navigation, we can actually programmatically do a lot of that for it. And we're doing the same thing on the College of Early Childhood Educators. I mentioned it's a simpler site. It is a bilingual site, so we start with the English-French layer, and then we go down levels from there. At the end of the day, though, part of it is to get the SEO-friendly URLs. Like we see here, we know we're on a SharePoint site because I'm in a pages library under the EN site, and I'm on the home.aspx page. Our Envision IT site used to be built the same way. So if I go to eit.co to get to www.envisionit.com, now as I go down in the various different areas, in fact, if I go down into the upgrade section and dig deeper into the pre-upgrade assessment, we see that we've got the friendly URLs there. Under the hood in this site, it's all collapsed into a single site with a single pages library, and then we're using the term store to provide the URLs and the breadcrumbs through from there. So it's a much nicer way of organizing the site. So let's have a look actually at upgrading this site here, our Envision IT site, which is on 2013 into 2016. So what does that upgrade path look like? So we decided, okay, we've already done the content reorganization. We're using the term store for navigation. This should be a simple database attached to do that upgrade. So there's some PowerShell here that I've got. Basically, this is using scripts from our template project, which is our Shakespeare site. You can actually download that from envisionit.com/Shakespeare to get a sense of some of the scripts that are behind here. But what we needed to do, we've done a SQL backup of the existing content database in SharePoint 2013, and we want to attach that to the 2016 farm. So on that farm, we run this mount SP content database, which is a standard Microsoft SharePoint PowerShell applet. And that attaches the database, but it also goes through the upgrade process. We review the log files, make sure all that looks good, and then we look at our custom components that we need as part of that. Well, we have a managed navigation full trust control that we need, so we need to deploy that WSP onto the farm. And then I mentioned we're using the term store both from a taxonomy point of view and from a navigation point of view. So we actually need to bring that term store in. So the term store is not part of the content database. It's one of the things you need to think about bringing across separately as part of your migration. So in the Shakespeare tool set, there's actually both import and export scripts that we've created. We've open sourced those for importing and exporting the term stores through XML files. So we exported it from the 2013 farm. We imported it into the new 2016 farm. That gets us our taxonomy, and that brings in our navigation. So having some challenges around that. I actually just did this upgrade, started it last night, so I was a little late in the game going through it. But if we come back to our site here, we can see here's our www 2016 site. You can hit that one. It's throwing up some errors because we still have some full trust solutions on the home page that I need to sort out. We can see I haven't set up the search, so that's another thing that we need to think about from an upgrade point of view that doesn't come across as part of the content database attach. We need to create all the managed properties in the search. So right now we're getting errors because the search is not configured on here. I need to rerun those scripts and run the full crawls, get the search all up to date from that point of view. But I can navigate around. I can see that I'm on a 2016 site because there's some changes to the UI. I mean, we hide this top ribbon when I'm not logged in, but now that I'm logged in, I see I've got an app launcher here, just like I have if you're familiar with Office 365. And you can actually combine that together. That's one of the big features for SharePoint 2016 is to have hybrid support, which covers a lot of different things. One of them is the app launcher. So if I had this wired into my Office 365 tenant as well, I would see things like my mail and calendar that are being served up through Office 365 integrated in through here. Things like search, where search can now create a single corpus both online and on-premise in SharePoint 2016 and provide a single place to search across and provide results out through from there. So there's some real results if you're working in a hybrid environment of moving to 2016 that it's built to support that hybrid type of environment. So let's come back to my deck here now. So that's on the 2016 side. I've only got about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure I get through all the content here. We're going to switch gears to the Office 365 side. So what is involved in upgrading to Office 365? Take a quick pause and sip of water here. Hang on. Well, the first thing is you need a subscription. So 365 is a subscription model, which means that every user in your organization that's going to use Office 365 needs a subscription assigned to them. Now, that can be either a full Office 365 subscription or a SharePoint Online subscription. And Microsoft, you can tell, is really pushing people to to the full Office 365, because if you look at the pricing for SharePoint Online, it's $6.10 a month. If you look at Office 365 Essentials, which applies for smaller organizations, it's also $6.10 a month. So they really want you to buy the full package. There's some different links here to look at the plans. Let's just open a couple of those up. So if I go to the 365 for business plans, these are the essentials. There's some limits on how many users in your organization. I think it's either 200 or 500 users in there right now. Oh, 300, there we go. So if you're a small or mid-sized organization, this can make a lot of sense for you. As well as getting just Office 365, though, you can roll in the desktop side of that as well. You can say, okay, I want the actual Office client as part of my subscription rather than buying Office for each of my users' computers. And there's some real advantages to that. It's very simplified. Every user has rights to install that onto up to 5 desktops, 5 tablets, and 5 phones. So, no worries about having enough versions for each of your users through there. Now, this one doesn't include the SharePoint Online and cloud side of that. That's the business premium here that kind of rolls these two plans together. So you can see that's a little bit cheaper than the combination of those two. It gets you the full online, which includes SharePoint Online, as well as the full desktop client licenses through there. So you really need to look at your whole licensing suite and what you're looking at as part of that. Now, if you're a larger organization, there is enterprise plans as well. So you have more than 300 users, you need to be looking at the various E-plans. And again, there's different flavors to that. Again, you can get Office 365 as part of the desktop clients. No, I don't want to chat with them right now. Or there's E1, E3, E5 plans, which include different feature sets. So E1 and E3, kind of think of that like the standard versus enterprise CALs in the on-premises SharePoint. So there's certain features that come as part of that. You can come down the matrix here and see the different components as part of that. And then E5 adds additional voice capabilities to that as well. So you look at your complete requirements and understand what makes the most sense from a subscription point of view. And then you need to think about, well, how are users going to actually authenticate to Office 365? I mean, the simplest way when you first create your subscription is to use what's called a cloud identity. Basically, you've got a username and a password up in Azure Active Directory. It's not integrated to your on-premises accounts at all. Most clients, though, at least set up what's called DirSync, where it synchronizes your on-premise Active Directory accounts up into the cloud. So it doesn't provide single sign-on, but it does provide the ability to sync the password. So the same password you use to log into your computer is what you sign into Office 365 as well. And then lastly, there's what's called federated identity, where when you go to Office 365, it actually redirects back to your on-premise, typically using Active Directory federation services to provide a single sign-on through there. So people don't need to enter credentials again once they've logged into their desktop, as long as it's part of the corporate domain. So what are the recommendations from an authentication point of view? I mean, the cloud and synchronized password options, that's fine if you're just running Exchange and Skype for Business, because your client is going to cache your credentials. I mean, once you've typed your username and password into Outlook, it stores it, and it typically never asks you for that again. So that's fairly convenient and works fine from that point of view. The problem is SharePoint is going to want users to log in every time they launch the browser. And yes, you can save your password in the browser and have it auto-submit that. It's still another step to go through. You're going to still see that login page, have to click login even though your credentials are there, and then go through, say, to your intranet from there. And that can be a real barrier to option. You think about a lot of organizations set their corporate portal to be the default homepage on the user's browsers through group policy. So anybody launches a browser on a corporate PC, it immediately goes to the staff portal. And if the first thing that you see is a login page, you're quite often going to skip and not even look at the portal because you actually wanted to go somewhere else. But if you're using Federation and ADFS, users are signed in automatically, they launch their browser, it still takes a few seconds to go through that login process, but they don't need to do anything, and boom, they're at the staff portal. That can really help from an adoption point of view. So we really recommend doing the Federation with ADFS if you're going to be doing SharePoint Online. Now, another question we get a lot as we're looking at SharePoint Online for our Canadian customers is around data sovereignty and data residency. So, what's the impact if our data is stored in a US data center, Patriot Act, things like that? The reality is that for most organizations, there's not really a big difference whether that data is in Canada or US. But there's a very strong emotional argument that's hard to overcome, particularly the senior leadership team that says, no, we just can't have our data in the US. They're not open to discussions around whether that's good or bad. It's just a showstopper right there. So Microsoft has recognized that. Microsoft Canada has been asking for years, and big announcement last summer was that Microsoft was opening 2 data centers, one in Toronto and one in Quebec City. They're already open today for private preview with customers in Azure. There's a whole web page and site dedicated to that I've linked here that talks about what's happening from the data center point of view. So that's fantastic news. I mean, by the first half of 2016, which is by the end of June 2016, is when Microsoft is publicly committed to having those open, not just for Azure, but for Office 365 as well. So we're really keen on that. We're looking to leverage that because we have seen this as a barrier for Office 365. But you need to think about, well, what does that mean? How quickly can I be in the Canadian data center? And it really depends on what you're doing in the cloud with Microsoft today. So if you're an existing Microsoft subscriber, yes, Microsoft will move you into the Canadian data center. It's not going to happen on day one when the data center goes live. There's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of review to say, okay, how complex is that environment? What have clients done from a federation, integration, customization point of view, and how do we move those across to the new data center? So if we look at Australia, for example, about this time last year, almost to the day, Australia went live with 2 new data centers in Sydney and Melbourne for Office 365 and CRM Online. It took until September 15th till Microsoft started doing existing tenant moves. So it was about a 3-4 month period there where if you were already live, in that case, typically you would have been in the Singapore data centers, that you would continue to be in Singapore. Microsoft communicates out, they give 2 weeks notice, let you know what the impact is from a move point of view. By the beginning part of this year, those moves were still in progress. I'm not sure whether they're completed now. They could still be in progress now. So, a year later, we're still seeing tenants who aren't in the Australian data center as a result of that move. Will it be faster or slower in Canada? Hard to say. Microsoft's being very cautious. They're not making any unrealistic promises to clients that, within a week of the data center being open, we'll have you migrated, because they know that's likely not the reality. But the key thing to remember, though, is if you don't currently have an Office 365 subscription, when you create a new subscription after the go live, so if I was in Australia and on April 1st, I created a net new Office 365 subscription, I could be confident that that subscription would immediately be in Australia, because there's no advantage for them to provision it in a different data center and then have to move it. They want to get those ones that are net new up live in the new data center right away. So if you're not in Office 365 yet, if you're concerned about data residency and sovereignty, you probably want to wait just for another 2 months or so excuse me, before you set up that new subscription. I mean, we've had some clients, one we just finished the full go live to Office 365, where we set that up on a temporary tenant, and we're actually going to do the migration for them as soon as the new data center goes live. So maybe July 1st or June 1st, whatever the dates are around that, we'll actually migrate from that temporary tenant to their live ultimate tenant that they want to be on, which we know will be in Canada, and then shut down the other one from there. Now, if you're already live with Exchange Online and things like that, it's a little more difficult to do something like that. But if you're looking purely at SharePoint, you haven't done anything in the cloud yet, I mean, that's an option, is to get your feet wet, get things going in the current US data centers, or even in the UK ones if you're concerned about US, and then migrate those yourselves, or have someone like us help you with that migration as soon as those data centers are open in Canada. So you can shortcut, get things going. For the clients that are already live, maybe with their email in a US data center, it's going to be tougher to get the SharePoint Online up quickly in Canada. Those are some details we're still trying to work out with Microsoft on that. Although, to be honest, if you're running your email through Exchange Online already, arguably the data sovereignty issue is probably a less of an issue for you anyways, because you're already running in a US data center. Okay, so those are some of the things to think about from a background with Office 365 point of view. Let's look at what's involved in actually doing the migration. So as I mentioned, you're going to want a third-party tool to do that. ShareGate, MetaLogix, those are our preferred tools that we've used with clients. I would say you use ShareGate more commonly, but we have used MetaLogix on a number of clients as well. Now, Microsoft, when Office 365 first got going, there was a lot of throttling that happened against imports that caused significant delays in doing that import process. It could take weeks or months to bring in, half terabyte content databases into Office 365. So that was a big concern. We worked a lot with Microsoft. I know the vendors, both ShareGate and MetaLogix, we worked with their teams and with Microsoft. And then about a year and a bit ago, they announced some changes internally, and then in the last 6 months or so, they've made those publicly available, where they actually have an Azure path through that both ShareGate and MetaLogix makes use of that dramatically increase that throughput and allow content to get faster into Office 365. Now, it can still take a long time. It can still take longer than you can achieve in one pass through. If it's hours or days, maybe you can done over a weekend. If it gets longer than that, you're not going to be able to shut down your business while you're doing a single pass migration through all of that. You need to start to parcel it up and take it piece by piece. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But testing, again, is very important. Just like with the on-premise, you're going to need to rinse and repeat this a number of times through there, make sure it's all working properly, get your users involved in there, and really understand what your timing is going to look like. There's some tricks that you can use to help improve that, running multiple migration jobs at the same time in different environments and such. But really, you want to make sure that's all tested out and you understand what your throughput is going to be and how long it's going to take to do that migration. So if you find that time is excessive, then you're going to be into what we call stage migrations. So it may need to occur over a longer period of time, and you're likely going to require a hybrid environment. So some content is going to continue to exist on premises in SharePoint, while other pieces of content move to SharePoint Online, and that may happen, over a series of weekends. It may even go over a period of months. So it's really important that you communicate properly here to let people know that this content is moving, this content has moved, this content is still remaining back in the on-premises for the time being, so that people know where to go to get the right content. And you want to make sure that you appropriately shut down the old content so people aren't going to the wrong place. You don't want navigation across that hybrid environment, so it's very easy for people to move between SharePoint Online and SharePoint on-premises without even really noticing that they're doing that. And branding is part of that as well. So that's all key as part of that. So let me take you through a couple minutes left here just to have a look at our own migration that we've been going through at Envision IT. So we've been running Office 365. We actually ran BPOS prior to that, which was the old name for it, for our Exchange and our Skype for Business. That's been live for 5-6 years now. So we've been in the cloud for a long time, but we haven't been there from a SharePoint point of view. We've always used an on-premise. A couple of reasons for that, and we needed an on-premise farm to support our public websites that share the farm with our intranet, but also we had some customizations that we built as part of that. So over the last 6 months, we've been doing a migration from our secure.envisionit.com, which is our on-premises 2013 farm, to envisionit.sharepoint.com, which is our Office 365 tenant. And you'll notice the target tenant.sharepoint.com, that's the reality of being in the cloud with Microsoft. Everybody's going to have something.sharepoint.com. So it's very easy to see if a SharePoint site is in the cloud from that point of view. Now, we already had ADFS in place for single sign-on for our Skype for Business and for our Outlook, but we had a couple things that were barriers here. We had a custom-developed project management and time tracking application that we'd integrated directly into the on-premises SharePoint. We'd done that through the back end, so it didn't play well from an Office 365 point of view. We'd also done integration with our on-premises Dynamic CRM, which at the same time, we were also migrating to CRM Online as well. And we had a number of full trust solutions as part of that. So what are the stages that we went through? We started with OneDrive for Business. This is an easy, low-hanging fruit for anybody to say, you know what, we've got Office 365, maybe we're using it for email. every one of those users gets a 1 terabyte OneDrive for Business that you can use. So it's easy to move that to Office 365. Maybe you weren't even using My Sites in your on-premises SharePoint, in which case this is a net new thing for them. Or they have a My Site that they want to move to OneDrive for Business. You could let users do that themselves, or there are third-party tools, like Mentalogix, that can manage that migration for you. Once they've got those personal drives up in OneDrive for Business, whether that was coming from a old school file share or from a My Sites, things like the OneDrive for Business sync client are great. There was a lot of grief with that in the past. Microsoft really stepped up and fixed up things from a OneDrive for Business point of view, so that's a nice experience from that perspective. So that's an easy place to start from an Office 365 point of view. And then we said, well, we've got our Extranet User Manager product team, which is really a business within a business. So let's take that whole business and move that into Office 365. And that was a fairly straightforward. We used ShareGate, moved that all across. We put some branding in place. We kept a consistent navigation, so the same global nav appears whether I'm on Office 365 or on premises. It makes it easy to flip back and forth through there. Then we started looking at our main Envision IT intranet. So we've got our common and department level sites. We moved all those across, again, using ShareGate. We moved our client archives across. We kept that, kept that not common nav across both of those. And we're at the last stage now, which is our client site. So this is where we had our line of business system integration, our CRM integration. We've actually finished our migration to CRM Online, so that's in place now, but we need to do some changes to those systems to support Office 365. So we're partway through doing those changes. We've wired up our Extranet User Manager, so our client's going to get access to our Office 365, and we're almost ready to finish that. Again, communication is key. We've got to communicate that not only to staff, but clients, because clients have access to that environment through our Extranet, and then retire those 2013 sites once we're all done. So apologies, I'm 1 minute over. We haven't really had a chance to have questions through here. I'll have a quick peek if there's anything that we want to have there. No, I think we're pretty good. So I'll just wrap up from there. As I mentioned, we've got a couple sessions coming up. So let me go back to our Envision IT site for a second. So if you go to events, I'm actually going to be speaking this Saturday, if you're in Montreal, at the SharePoint Saturday on the new apps model that we have. It's not a SharePoint apps model. It's a different way of building electronic forms and apps. I'm actually repeating that towards the end of April as a webinar, so if you're interested in that, check that out. And then we're going to be doing an Extranet session on both SharePoint and Office 365. We've got some new releases that we put out with our product and such. That's going to be on April 20th. So I encourage you to sign up for those. Thanks very much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.